Between the years of 1800 and 1830, there was going to be a population explosion in the young nation. Our population was going to grow from 5 million to 12 million citizens. And those citizens wanted land. They wanted it for themselves, they wanted it for their families, and they were going to push and push and push the boundaries of the United States. Now, around that time, there were also 65,000 Indians living in the southeastern corner of the state. Those were the only tribal lands they had remaining after the Jackson Purchase had been completed. Now, those 65,000 Indians had really adopted the white culture by that time. They had a sophisticated government, they built schools, they built churches. Sequoyah had even developed a written language, so they had published newspapers. But these peaceful people saw big trouble coming. They had been seeing it for decades by now. And a group of Cherokee leaders who did not have the authority to do so under their government were going to meet with some government officials at the Cherokee capital of New Echota. And they went there against the wishes of the Cherokee people, and they went there without the consent of John Ross, who was the much respected and admired Cherokee chief. So when they go to New Echota, this small group of Indians agrees to a deal. They are going to sign over the remaining tribal lands to the government for the sum of $5 million. Now, they weren't personally going to profit from this deal, and probably they thought and believed they were doing what was in the best interest of their people. But the Cherokee tribes were outraged over this deal. There were those in the American government who questioned its constitutionality because the deal was signed with people who didn't have the authority to make the deal. Nevertheless, Andrew Jackson, who is president by now, is going to use the deal at New Echota as the basis for signing the Indian Removal Act. And in 1830, Andrew Jackson is going to sign the order that is going to force the removal of the remaining Indians in the southeastern part of Tennessee. Now, at first, the Cherokee refused to comply with that order, and when they did, they were rounded up by soldiers. They were imprisoned until they could be force-marched 1,200 miles or placed on overcrowded boats, some of which sank. And on that 1,200-mile forced march, the sick and the weak were left behind to die unattended. There was very little food to eat. What food they had was rotten food that was unfit for white citizens to consume. They were given dirty water to drink. They walked through blistering summers. They walked through freezing winters. And in the Cherokee language, this trek was known as the place where they cried. Now, we call it today the Trail of Tears. That journey took months to complete, and it took several years before the Indian Removal Act was complete. Now, you can see the journey that the Cherokee were forced to take. Some of them went by land, some of them went by boat part of the way, and they were moved to an area west of the Mississippi River which would become the state of Oklahoma. Now, the Trail of Tears, the place where they cried, resulted in losing 1/3 of the remaining Indian population in this land. It is the act by which Andrew Jackson would be remembered. Now, Andrew Jackson's take on it, he saw himself as a father to the red children. He thought he said he was doing them a favor by helping them preserve their culture, by removing them away and placing them away from the white population. There were others who didn't see it that way and thought Jackson was just trying to fool himself. History judges him sometimes by the act of the Trail of Tears or the Indian Removal Act. There are historians who look at him and say, well, no, he was a great president. He did things to help the young nation move forward. There are other historians who look at Jackson and they see him as the brutal person who really brought about the end to the Indian culture as it stood in America at that time. And you remember, we call him Old Hickory. And to the Indians, he was Sharp Knife. Jackson refused for the rest of his life to admit the part he played in the destruction of the Indian culture and the loss of their remaining tribal lands. We look back today and we can say, you know, Andrew Jackson, he was like a lot of people. He wasn't all good. He wasn't all bad. He was a complicated person that we have to look at the totality of his life and his contributions in order to determine what kind of leader he really was.